My name is Dorothy Myers, but everyone who knows me calls me Dot. I'm 79 years old. And I've lived every single one of those years right here in rural Kansas, watching wheat fields change with the seasons and seeing generations of children grow up before my eyes. They say teachers touch the future, but what they don't tell you is how deeply the future touches you back. I never married, never had children of my own. For most folks around here, that would make me incomplete somehow, like I missed out on life's greatest purpose. But let me tell you something, purpose finds you in the most unexpected ways, often when you least expect it, and in forms you never imagined. Sometimes the family you create means more than the one you're born into, and sometimes the love you give away comes back to you multiplied in ways that would make your heart burst if you really stop to think about it. I spent over 30 years in a one-room schoolhouse that most people would drive right past without a second glance. But inside those worn wooden walls, magic happened every single day. I watched shy children find their voices, saw struggling readers discover they were actually brilliant, and witnessed dreams take root in the most unlikely soil. Education isn't just about teaching multiplication tables and spelling words. It's about showing a child that they matter, that they have something valuable to contribute to this world. But this isn't just a story about teaching. This is about choosing love over fear, about opening your heart when it would be easier to keep it closed, and about how one decision at 29 years old changed, not just my life, but proved that sometimes the most broken things can be made beautiful again. It's about sacrifice and joy, about heartbreak and hope, about finding your calling in the most ordinary moments. If you've ever wondered whether your life matters, whether the choices you make when nobody's watching really count for something, then stay with me. Because I'm about to tell you about a life that looks simple from the outside, but has been anything but simple on the inside. I'm going to share with you the moments that shaped me, the people who changed me, and the one decision that showed me what it really means to be somebody's everything. So pull up a chair, pour yourself some coffee, and let me tell you how a small-town school teacher discovered that the biggest lives are often lived in the smallest places. I was born on a crisp October morning in 1945, when the world was still catching its breath after the war. My parents, Robert and Helen Myers, were simple farming people who believed in hard work, Sunday church, and treating your neighbors like family. Dad grew wheat and corn on land his father had worked before him, while Mama tended to the house, the garden, and me with the same gentle precision she used for everything in her life. Our farmhouse sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by fields that stretched to the horizon in every direction. It was the kind of place where you could see weather coming from miles away, where the sunset painted the sky in colors that would make city folks stop their cars just to stare. But to me, it was simply home, the only world I knew, and the world I loved. I was an only child, which was unusual for farming families back then. Mama had complications when I was born, and the doctor told her there wouldn't be any more babies. I saw how that news settled into her heart like a stone in still water, creating ripples of sadness that never quite went away. Dad never said much about it, but I caught him sometimes looking at me with this expression, like he was trying to love me enough for all the children they'd never have. This made me careful, responsible in ways that other children weren't. I knew I was precious cargo, the only chance my parents had at leaving something of themselves in this world. It's a heavy thing for a child to carry, knowing you're somebody's everything. I learned to be quiet when Mama had her headaches, learned to help Dad with chores without being asked, learned to make myself useful so they'd never regret that I was all they had. School was my escape and my joy. The little schoolhouse was 3 miles down the road, and I walked there every day, rain or shine. Mrs. Henderson was my teacher. All 6 grades crammed into one room, with her managing everything from teaching first graders their letters to helping 8th graders prepare for high school. She was magic to me, The way she could make every child feel important, the way she knew exactly what each of us needed to hear. I was a natural student, hungry for books and knowledge in a way that surprised everyone. While other farm kids counted the days until they could quit school and work the land, I counted the books in our little library, reading everything I could get my hands on. Mrs. Henderson noticed this hunger and started bringing me special books from town, stories about places far from Kansas, and people who lived lives completely different from mine. But it wasn't just the learning that drew me to school, it was the teaching itself. I loved watching Mrs. Henderson work, loved seeing how she could take a confused child and guide them to understanding, how she could make learning feel like an adventure rather than a chore. By the time I was 10 years old, I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. The years passed quietly but happily. I excelled in my studies, helped my parents with increasing responsibility, and never gave them a moment's trouble. I was the good daughter, the obedient child, the one who always did what was expected. But inside me, dreams were growing, dreams of my own classroom, my own students, my own chance to make magic happen in young minds. When I graduated from 8th grade, there was never any question that I'd continue to high school, even though it meant a long bus ride to town every day. My parents sacrificed to make it possible, understanding somehow that their quiet daughter had been given a gift that needed nurturing. High school opened up a whole new world for me. Suddenly, I was around kids from town, kids whose families owned businesses or worked in offices, kids who took for granted things that seemed miraculous to me. But instead of feeling intimidated, I threw myself into learning with even more determination. I was going to prove that a farm girl could be just as smart, just as capable as anyone else. I joined the debate team, wrote for the school newspaper, and tutored younger students who were struggling with their studies. My teachers encouraged me to think about college, something that seemed as distant and impossible as traveling to the moon. College was for rich kids, for boys who were going to become doctors and lawyers. It wasn't for farm girls from rural Kansas. But my English teacher, Miss Patterson, wouldn't let me give up on the dream. She stayed after school to help me fill out scholarship applications, wrote letters of recommendation that made me sound like someone special, and slowly convinced me that maybe, just maybe, I could make it happen. The day I got my acceptance letter to Kansas State Teachers College, along with a partial scholarship, I cried tears of joy and terror at the same time. Leaving home for college was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Mama cried when Dad loaded my suitcase into his old pickup truck, and I saw him wipe away tears he thought nobody noticed. They were proud of me, but they were also scared. I was venturing into a world they didn't understand, becoming someone they might not recognize when I came back. College was overwhelming at first. I'd never lived anywhere but home, never been responsible for myself in such a complete way. My roommate was a girl from Topeka who seemed impossibly sophisticated, with clothes I'd only seen in magazines and stories about places I'd only read about in books. I felt like a country mouse trying to pretend I belonged in a world of city cats. But once classes started, I found my footing. Education courses came naturally to me, and I discovered I had a gift for connecting with the professors who would shape my understanding of teaching. I learned about child psychology, about different learning styles, about the profound responsibility teachers have in shaping young lives. Everything I studied felt like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting my whole life to be put together. I worked hard, harder than most of my classmates. I had to. My scholarship covered tuition, but I needed jobs to pay for books, food, and the little extras that other students took for granted. I cleaned offices in the early morning, worked in the library between classes, and tutored struggling students in the evening. Every penny was accounted for, every hour scheduled. During my sophomore year, I met James Morrison in American history class. He was studying to be a high school principal, a tall, serious young man with kind eyes and dreams of reforming education from the inside. We started studying together, then walking together after class, then sitting together in the cafeteria. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to care about someone in a way that made your heart race and your palms sweat. James was everything I thought I wanted: ambitious, intelligent, respectful. He talked about our future together as if it was as certain as sunrise, planning where we'd work, how we'd change education together, how we'd raise our children to value learning above everything else. I let myself dream along with him, imagining a life that seemed too perfect to be real. But as graduation approached, cracks started showing in our perfect future. James got offered a position at a prestigious school district near Kansas City, a chance to start climbing the ladder toward his dreams of administration. I got offered exactly what I'd always wanted: a position at a small rural school that needed someone who understood country kids and their unique challenges. The choice should have been simple: follow James to the city, marry him like we'd planned, teach in a district with more resources and opportunities for advancement. But something in my heart kept pulling me back to that little country school, back to the kind of students I'd been, back to where I felt I was truly needed. The conversation with James didn't go the way either of us expected. I thought I could explain why the rural position called to me, why I felt like that's where I belonged. I thought he'd understand that sometimes the most important work happens in the places nobody else wants to go. But James saw it as choosing backwardness over progress, choosing limitation over opportunity. "Dorothy," he said, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice, "you're too smart to waste yourself in some one-room schoolhouse in the middle of nowhere. You could do so much more in the city, reach so many more students, make a real difference in education." But he didn't understand that more isn't always better, that sometimes the most profound impact happens one student at a time, in places where every single child matters because there are so few of them. I tried to explain this, but I could see him pulling away with every word, could see our carefully planned future crumbling like a house built on sand. In the end, we chose different paths. James went to Kansas City and eventually became the principal he'd always dreamed of being. I heard through friends that he married another teacher a few years later, had 3 children, built the life he'd wanted. Sometimes I wondered if I'd made the right choice, if love was worth sacrificing for a calling. But the moment I walked into Prairie View Elementary School, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. It was a small, white building that looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, surrounded by wheat fields and sky that went on forever. 23 students from kindergarten through 6th grade, all looking at me with curious eyes and guarded hope. The school board was thrilled to have someone with actual education training. The previous teacher had been Mrs. Patterson, no relation to my high school teacher, who'd taught there for 43 years with nothing but a high school diploma and natural wisdom. She was retiring at 71, finally ready to let someone else carry the torch. Those first few months were baptism by fire. Teaching 6 different grade levels simultaneously was like conducting an orchestra where every section was playing a different symphony. While the first graders worked on letter recognition, the 4th graders needed help with long division, and the 6th graders were struggling with essay writing. I had to learn to divide my attention, my energy, and my expertise in ways college had never prepared me for. But slowly, beautifully, it started working. I discovered that the older students could help teach the younger ones, that mixing ages created a family atmosphere that made learning feel natural and supportive. The 6th grader who struggled with reading suddenly found confidence when he helped kindergartners with their letters. The shy 3rd grader blossomed when she became the 4th grader's math tutor. My students were farm kids children who understood hard work and responsibility, but had never been told they were smart, never been encouraged to dream beyond the boundaries of their small community. They arrived at school in hand-me-down clothes and worn-out shoes, carrying lunch pails their mothers had packed before dawn. But inside those humble exteriors were brilliant minds waiting to be awakened. I threw myself into teaching with everything I had. I stayed late to prepare lessons, arrived early to help struggling students, and spent my weekends creating materials that would make learning come alive for my little classroom. I organized science fairs, spelling bees, and reading competitions. I brought in guest speakers from town and arranged field trips to places my students had never seen. During this time, Mama started showing signs of the illness that would define the next 20 years of our lives. It started small, forgetting where she'd put things, losing track of conversations, seeming confused by routines that had been second nature for decades. Dad was in denial at first, making excuses for her lapses, insisting she was just tired or distracted. But I could see the fear in his eyes when Mama couldn't remember my name one evening, when she asked me who I was and why I was in her kitchen. The doctor confirmed what we'd already begun to suspect: early-onset dementia, a cruel thief that would slowly steal away the woman we loved while leaving her body behind. This changed everything about my life outside of school. My evenings were now spent helping Dad care for Mama, my weekends divided between lesson planning and managing her increasing needs. The dreams I'd had of maybe finding love again, of building a life beyond teaching and family obligations, began to fade as reality set in. But somehow, taking care of Mama while teaching my students felt like two parts of the same calling. Both required infinite patience, unconditional love, and the faith that what you were doing mattered even when you couldn't see the results. Both demanded that you give more than you thought you had, that you find strength in places you didn't know existed. As the years passed, I settled into a rhythm that became the heartbeat of my life. Monday through Friday, I belonged to my students. Evenings and weekends, I belonged to my parents. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I was young, but it was a life filled with purpose and meaning, even if it sometimes felt overwhelmingly heavy. My reputation as a teacher grew throughout the county. Parents specifically requested that their children be enrolled at Prairie View Elementary to be in my classroom. The school board members bragged about me at their meetings in town. Other teachers sought my advice on handling mixed-age classrooms and reaching rural students. I became known as someone who could work miracles with children others had given up on. But the work was taking its toll. Teaching 6th grade levels while caring for Mama meant I rarely had a moment to myself. I was constantly tired, constantly worried, constantly feeling like I wasn't doing enough in any area of my life. Some of my college friends had moved to cities, married, started families. They sent Christmas cards with pictures of their children, updates about promotions, and new houses and family vacations. I sent back brief notes about school activities and Mama's health, wondering if they thought I was wasting my life. Dad tried to help as much as he could, but watching Mama disappear piece by piece was breaking his heart in ways that made him less capable, not more. He'd sit with her for hours, holding her hand and talking about memories she could no longer access, tears streaming down his weathered face. The strong, capable man who'd taught me about perseverance was crumbling under the weight of losing his life partner to a disease that had no cure, no hope, no mercy. It was during this particularly difficult period that Tommy Rodriguez arrived at my school. He was 8 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that never seemed to stay combed and clothes that had seen better days. His father worked seasonal jobs and had a reputation for drinking too much. His mother had left when Tommy was 5, just disappeared one day with no explanation, no goodbye, no promise to return. Tommy's grandmother had been caring for him, but she'd recently suffered a stroke and could no longer manage. The social services caseworker brought him to me one gray February morning, explaining that he'd been shuffled between relatives and was now in temporary foster care with a family who lived in my school district. She warned me that he was difficult, acting out in class, refusing to do homework, getting into fights with other children. But when I looked into Tommy's eyes, I didn't see a difficult child. I saw a scared, angry, heartbroken little boy who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted, that love was temporary, that it was safer to push people away before they could leave you. I saw a child who desperately needed someone to believe in him, to show him that not all adults would abandon him, that he was worth fighting for. The other children were wary of Tommy at first. He had a reputation that preceded him, stories of classroom disruptions and playground fights. But I'd learned over the years that the children who act out the most are usually the ones who hurt the most. They're not bad kids. They're kids who've been badly hurt and don't know how to express their pain in healthy ways. I started slowly with Tommy, setting clear boundaries but offering unconditional acceptance within those boundaries. When he refused to do his work, I sat beside him and worked on my own papers, letting him know I was there without pressuring him. When he got into a scuffle with another student, I separated them calmly and talked through the problem without shaming anyone. When he tested me by using language that would have gotten him in serious trouble elsewhere, I simply said, "Tommy, I know you're upset, but we need to find better words for those feelings." The breakthrough came 3 weeks after he arrived. I was staying late to grade papers when I heard crying coming from the cloakroom. I found Tommy curled up in the corner, sobbing with the kind of desperate sadness that breaks your heart. He'd wet himself during math class and was too ashamed to tell anyone, too afraid that I'd be angry or disgusted. I cleaned him up without making a big deal about it, gave him spare clothes I kept for such emergencies, and sat with him while he ate the extra sandwich I'd brought for lunch. For the first time, he looked at me with something other than suspicion or defiance. He looked at me with hope, as if maybe, just maybe, this adult might be different from all the others who'd let him down. That evening, I drove to his foster home to check on him. What I found there changed the course of both our lives forever. The foster home was chaos. 3 other children, a harried foster mother who clearly had more kids than she could handle, and Tommy sitting alone in a corner, forgotten and invisible. The house was clean enough, and there was no evidence of abuse or neglect in the legal sense. But there was no warmth, no individual attention, no sense that anyone truly cared about Tommy as a person rather than as a source of state funding. I watched him during the brief visit, saw how he'd learned to disappear into himself, how he made himself small and quiet so as not to be a bother. This wasn't the angry, defiant child who'd been disrupting my classroom. This was a boy who'd learned that love was conditional, that belonging was temporary, that he was fundamentally unwanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tommy, about the look in his eyes, about the way he'd flinched when the foster mother raised her voice to the other children. I thought about all the children I'd taught over the years, all the ones who'd gone home to loving families, and all the ones who hadn't. I thought about the difference one person could make in a child's life, about the responsibility we have to the most vulnerable among us. Over the next few weeks, I found myself spending more and more time with Tommy after school. I'd help him with his homework, let him help me clean the classroom, talk to him about books and dreams and possibilities he'd never dared to consider. Slowly, gradually, he began to trust me. The anger started melting away, replaced by curiosity and hope and the tentative beginnings of affection. His academic work improved dramatically. The boy who'd been labeled as having learning disabilities turned out to be remarkably intelligent, just traumatized and disconnected from the learning process. He had a natural gift for math, a vivid imagination for creative writing, and questions about everything that showed a mind hungry for knowledge and understanding. But more than his academic progress, it was his emotional growth that touched my heart. He started smiling, started playing with the other children, started believing that maybe he was worth caring about after all. The transformation was miraculous to watch, proof that children are incredibly resilient when given the love and stability they need. It was during this time that I had my first serious conversation with the social worker about Tommy's future. His foster placement was temporary, and they were looking for a more permanent solution. There was talk of moving him to another county where relatives lived, relatives who'd shown little interest in him, but who might be willing to take him in. The thought of Tommy being moved away, of losing the progress we'd made together, of him being placed with people who didn't understand his needs, was unbearable to me. That night, driving home from another visit with Mama at the hospital where she'd been admitted for pneumonia, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to try to adopt Tommy. It seemed impossible at first. I was a single woman in 1974, a time when single-parent adoption was rare and often discouraged. I had an aging, sick mother who required constant care. I lived on a teacher's salary in a small rural community. I had no experience as a parent, no husband to help share the responsibility, no family support system beyond my increasingly frail father. But I had something more important than any of those conventional advantages. I had love for Tommy that was fierce and unconditional. I had a stable home and a steady job. I had experience working with children and understanding their needs. Most importantly, I had the absolute certainty that Tommy belonged with me, that this was what I was meant to do, who I was meant to be. The process was long and complicated. There were home visits and background checks, psychological evaluations, and financial reviews. Social workers questioned my motives, my ability to handle both an adopted child and a sick mother, my understanding of what single parenthood would mean for my career and my future. Some people in the community were supportive, understanding that Tommy needed someone like me. Others were judgmental, whispering that it wasn't natural for an unmarried woman to take on such a responsibility, that I was being foolish and impulsive, that Tommy would be better off with a real family. But Tommy himself was my strongest advocate. When the social worker asked him what he wanted, he said simply, "I want to stay with Miss Dot. She makes me feel safe." That one sentence carried more weight than all the paperwork and evaluations in the world. The adoption was finalized on a cold December morning in 1974, just 2 days before Tommy's 9th birthday. I'll never forget the moment the judge signed the papers and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Myers. Tommy is officially your son." Tommy looked at me with tears in his eyes and whispered, "Does this mean you can't send me away?" When I told him that nothing in the world could ever make me send him away, he hugged me with a ferocity that took my breath away. Suddenly, I was a mother. At 29, I went from being a single teacher, living quietly with her aging parents, to being responsible for a young boy who'd been through more trauma than most adults ever experience. The adjustment was enormous for both of us. Tommy had never lived in a stable home, never had his own room, never owned toys or books that were truly his. I had never had to consider another person in my daily decisions, never had to balance parenting with teaching and caregiving. But somehow, miraculously, it worked. Tommy thrived in the consistency and love of our home. He helped me care for Mama, reading to her even when she couldn't understand the words, holding her hand during her worst moments of confusion. Dad, who'd been skeptical about the adoption at first, fell completely in love with his new grandson, teaching him about farming and mechanics and the satisfaction of working with your hands. At school, Tommy became a different child entirely. His grades soared, his behavior improved dramatically, and he became a leader among the other students. He helped newer students adjust to our mixed-age classroom, defended children who were being picked on, and showed a maturity and compassion that came from understanding what it meant to be vulnerable. Watching Tommy bloom was like watching a miracle unfold day by day. The angry, scared child who'd arrived at my school became a confident, caring young man who believed in himself because someone had first believed in him. He had opinions about books, dreams about his future, friends who looked up to him. He laughed easily, hugged freely, and brought joy into our home every single day. But raising Tommy also meant making sacrifices I hadn't fully anticipated. Any thoughts of dating or remarrying disappeared entirely. Between teaching full-time, caring for Mama, and being a single parent to a child with special emotional needs, there simply wasn't time or energy for a romantic relationship. The few men who might have been interested were intimidated by my circumstances. And frankly, I was too protective of Tommy to introduce uncertainty into his life when he was still healing from so much instability. My social life became virtually non-existent. While other women my age were joining clubs and going to dinner parties, I was helping with homework, attending school functions as both teacher and parent, and making sure Tommy felt secure and loved. Sometimes I felt isolated, wondering if I'd made the right choice, if I was missing out on experiences I'd never have the chance to have again. But those doubts always disappeared when I looked at Tommy, when I saw the light in his eyes that had been so dim when he first arrived, when I watched him help another struggling child with the same patience I'd shown him. This was my calling, my purpose, my greatest contribution to the world. I was raising a human being who would go out and make the world better because someone had taken the time to show him love when he needed it most. The years passed in a blur of school activities, family dinners, and quiet evenings reading together. Tommy excelled in middle school and high school, earning scholarships and awards, making friends and memories. But more importantly, he became the kind of person who looked out for others, who stood up for what was right, who understood that everyone deserves a chance at love and belonging. When Mama passed away in 1985 after 20 years of illness, Tommy was there beside me, holding my hand as I held hers, understanding without words that we were losing the grandmother who'd loved him as fiercely as any biological grandparent ever could. He was 17 then, mature enough to help me support Dad through his grief, strong enough to be the man of the house when I needed him to be. Dad lived 3 more years after Mama died, years when he and Tommy grew even closer, when they worked together to maintain the farm and create new memories to add to the old ones. When Dad passed in 1988, Tommy postponed his college plans to stay home with me for a year, understanding that I needed time to grieve and adjust to life without the parents who'd been my anchor for 43 years. But I wouldn't let him sacrifice his future for my comfort. That fall, I drove him to Kansas State University, helped him move into his dormitory room, and hugged him goodbye with pride and terror warring in my heart. My little boy was becoming a man, ready to build his own life, and I had to trust that I'd given him the tools he needed to succeed. Tommy's college years were both proud and lonely for me. He called every week, came home for holidays and summers, and made sure I knew I was still important to him. But the house felt enormous without his energy filling it, without his friends stopping by after school, without his music playing from his room. For the first time in 14 years, I was truly alone. I threw myself even deeper into teaching, taking on additional responsibilities at school and in the community. I started a literacy program for adult learners, organized educational workshops for other rural teachers, and became known throughout the region as an expert in rural education. My classroom became a model that other teachers visited to learn techniques for managing multiple grade levels effectively. But the loneliness was real and sometimes overwhelming. I was 50 when Tommy left for college, an age when many women were entering their prime years with grown children and established marriages. Instead, I was starting over, trying to figure out who Dorothy Myers was when she wasn't actively mothering or caring for aging parents. Tommy flourished in college, majoring in social work with a minor in education. He was following in my footsteps in his own way, choosing a career focused on helping others, on making a difference in the lives of people who needed advocates and support. His professors praised his maturity, his compassion, and his ability to connect with people from all backgrounds. I knew his childhood experiences had shaped him into someone uniquely equipped to help others navigate difficult circumstances. During his junior year, he brought home a girlfriend for Christmas. Sarah was a lovely young woman studying elementary education, someone who shared Tommy's passion for helping children and creating positive change in the world. Watching them together, seeing how gently he treated her, how respectfully they communicated, how they supported each other's dreams, I felt proud of the man he'd become. I'd raised a son who knew how to love and be loved in return. They married the summer after graduation. A small ceremony in our little church with reception in the community center where I'd attended so many school functions over the years. Walking Tommy down the aisle as his adoptive mother was one of the most bittersweet moments of my life. I was losing my daily companion, but gaining a daughter-in-law who welcomed me into their new family with genuine warmth. Tommy and Sarah moved to Denver, where he got a job with Child Protective Services, and she began teaching third grade. They bought a small house with a yard where they planned to raise children of their own someday. They visited regularly, called frequently, and made sure I knew I would always be an important part of their lives. But their move also marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I had to confront the choices I'd made and their consequences. At 55, I was completely alone for the first time since childhood. The house that had once been full of voices and activity now echoed with silence. The future stretched ahead of me with no clear shape or purpose beyond continuing to teach until retirement. I began to reflect seriously on the path my life had taken. Had I made the right choices? Had the sacrifices been worth it? I thought about James, about the life we might have built together if I'd chosen differently. I thought about the children I'd never had, the romantic love I'd never experienced, the adventures I'd never pursued because duty and responsibility had always come first. Some evenings, when the loneliness felt particularly heavy, I questioned everything. Had I wasted my life playing it safe, staying in my small corner of the world while others explored and experienced and built traditional families? Had my fierce independence actually been fear in disguise? Fear of risking my heart in ways that might have led to greater happiness? But then I'd remember Tommy's face on adoption day, remember the transformation from scared, angry child to confident, loving man. I'd think about all my students over the years, the ones who'd gone on to become teachers and doctors and parents themselves, carrying forward lessons they'd learned in my classroom. I'd remember Mama's last lucid moments when she'd looked at me and whispered, "I'm so proud of the woman you became, Dorothy." Maybe my life hadn't followed a conventional path, but it had been a life of purpose and meaning. I'd loved deeply, even if not romantically. I'd made a difference, even if in quiet, unrecognized ways. I'd raised a child who was now making the world better because of the love and values I'd instilled in him. My 60s brought unexpected challenges and surprising joys. Tommy and Sarah blessed me with 2 grandchildren. First Emma, then 3 years later, little Robert, named after my father. Suddenly, I had a whole new reason for living, new people to love and worry about and celebrate. Being a grandmother was different from being a mother. Sweeter somehow because the ultimate responsibility belonged to someone else, but the love was just as fierce. I retired from teaching at 65, after 35 years in the same classroom. The community threw me a retirement party that brought together hundreds of former students, parents, and colleagues. I was amazed by how many lives I'd touched, how many people considered me an important part of their story. Former students, now adults with children of their own, told me how I believed in them when no one else did, how I'd taught them that learning was an adventure, how my classroom had been a safe haven during difficult times in their lives. But retirement also brought health challenges I hadn't anticipated. A cancer diagnosis at 68 required surgery and months of treatment that left me weak and frightened. For the first time, I truly understood my own mortality, realized that the years ahead were numbered and precious. Tommy and Sarah wanted me to move to Denver to be closer to them, but I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the only home I'd ever known. Instead, we reached a compromise. I would stay in Kansas, but accept more help, allow them to visit more frequently, and promise to be honest about my needs and limitations. It was hard for someone who'd spent her entire life taking care of others to admit she sometimes needed taking care of herself. The cancer treatment was successful, but it changed me in ways both physical and emotional. I became more philosophical, more aware of the fleeting nature of life, more grateful for simple pleasures. I started writing letters to Tommy and my grandchildren, sharing family stories and life lessons I wanted them to remember. I began volunteering at the local literacy center, still teaching but now helping adults learn to read rather than children. My 70s have been quieter but deeply satisfying. I watch my grandchildren grow through video calls and visit them several times a year. Emma is 15 now, smart and determined like her grandmother, already talking about becoming a teacher. Robert is 12, kind-hearted and curious, with his father's gentle nature and his great-grandfather's practical wisdom. Tommy has become a supervisor in his department, helping to train new social workers and advocating for policy changes that better protect children in the system. He often tells people that his own experiences in foster care and adoption drive his passion for the work, that he understands both the trauma and the healing that's possible when children are placed with people who truly want them. Sarah has become a principal, carrying forward many of the multi-age learning techniques she learned from me when she visited my classroom years ago. She credits our conversations about rural education with shaping her understanding of how to reach children who don't fit traditional molds. Sometimes I marvel at the ripple effects of that decision I made when I was 29 years old. By adopting Tommy, I not only changed his life trajectory, but influenced the hundreds of children he's helped through his work in social services. By teaching Sarah about alternative educational approaches, I've indirectly impacted the thousands of students who have benefited from her innovative leadership. The loneliness I felt in my 50s has largely faded, replaced by a deep sense of contentment and connection. I have a chosen family that spans generations, friends in the community who check on me regularly, and a legacy of former students who still send me Christmas cards and updates about their lives. I've learned that there are many ways to live a meaningful life, many definitions of success and fulfillment. My path wasn't conventional, but it was mine. Every choice I made, staying in rural Kansas instead of following James to the city, adopting Tommy instead of pursuing traditional marriage and motherhood, caring for my parents instead of building an independent life, led me to exactly where I was meant to be. The house is quiet now, but it's a peaceful quiet filled with memories and love. I tend a small garden, read voraciously, correspond with family and friends, and volunteer when my energy allows. I've become the community elder I never expected to be, the person younger folks come to for advice and perspective. Last month, Tommy called to tell me that he and Sarah are considering adopting a child themselves, a 10-year-old girl who's been in foster care for 3 years. "You showed me that family isn't just about biology," he said. You taught me that love can heal almost anything if you're patient enough and persistent enough. Hearing those words, I knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. Every difficult choice had led to something beautiful. The scared 8-year-old boy I'd taken into my heart and home 45 years ago was now ready to offer the same gift to another child who needed it. As I sit here in my kitchen, looking out at the same wheat fields I've watched change with the seasons for 79 years, I'm struck by how full a quiet life can be. I never traveled the world or achieved fame or accumulated wealth. I never had a husband or biological children or a house in the city. But I have something more precious than any of those things. I have the deep satisfaction of knowing that my life mattered, that I made a difference in ways both seen and unseen. The little girl inside me, who dreamed of being a teacher, could never have imagined the journey that dream would take her on. She thought teaching was about lesson plans and report cards, about helping children learn their letters and numbers. She didn't understand that teaching is really about loving, about seeing potential where others see problems, about believing in people until they can believe in themselves. If I could speak to my younger self, the college girl agonizing over whether to follow James or follow her heart, the 29-year-old teacher contemplating adoption, the middle-aged woman wondering if she'd wasted her life on other people's dreams, I would tell her to trust the voice inside that calls her toward love, toward service, toward the harder path that leads to grace. Every person who crosses our path is there for a reason. Every choice we make ripples out in ways we'll never fully understand. The key is to choose love over fear, service over comfort, faith over certainty. The key is to remember that the smallest lives often cast the longest shadows, and that sometimes the most ordinary decisions create the most extraordinary outcomes. My name is Dorothy Myers, but everyone who knows me calls me Dot. I'm 79 years old, and I've lived every single one of those years learning that love multiplies when you give it away, that family is created through choice as much as biology, and that the most important lessons aren't found in textbooks but in the courage to open your heart when it would be easier to keep it closed. This is my story. It may not be remarkable by the world's standards, but it's mine, and it's been enough.